What's going on? You guys notice there's no topic up there? Questions? Easiest speech I've ever delivered. No, I'm joking. I'm going to talk to you guys today a little bit about resilience and adversity because it's two of my favorite topics, or you can combine it and say it's my favorite topic. But we have to go on a little bit of a journey first. But I'm going to start with one of my favorite questions, and I ask it at almost every audience that I speak at. By a show of hands, who in this room is a leader? Okay. We're going to address that issue in a little bit. We'll get back to that, because if you looked around, maybe half the hands went up, and that's a problem. It's one of the biggest problems I think we have in this country, but we'll get there. So, resilience. Anybody want to throw a definition out for me? I tell you right now, I got my definition off of Google, so does anybody want to rush there and see what it says? If you were to go there, it would say the ability of a substance or an object to spring back into shape. That's one. Like, all right. Right, we can kind of start with that as a framework. Would everybody agree? Nod your head. This is going to be participation on both sides. This is going to suck. All right. Two, another thing you're going to find, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And that one has a little bit of an asterisk, and they say toughness with it. Can we get on board and use those as a framework? All right. They're a framework, but I think they're incomplete. To me, in my opinion, they need to have words added to each one of those sentences. And the first word that I would add to the first sentence is that it needs to say the ability of a substance or an object to spring back into shape, comma, stronger. Because if you're not moving the needle and you're just going to accept the status quo, even the strongest spring, if it's bent, is never going to originally get back to its current position. It'll at least never go farther than where it started. As far as the toughness side of the house, I would add two words. The capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, comma, and evolve and innovate. If you disregard innovation and evolution, you're basically blinding yourself to the world around you. And the best example that I can give you of that is when anybody wants to rent a movie. Is anybody going to Blockbuster? How fun was that, though? To go on a Friday and race towards that VHS tape, and you're like, yes, is it back there? No, it's not. So you'd go to the counter and say, hey, can you check the return drawer? Who's been there? I have. If you haven't, then you were born too young and life's going to suck for you. But that's a different story. All right, the second one is like a Tower Records, or where I used to go to buy the hundreds of, probably thousands of CDs that I have sitting in my house. Why I'm holding on to them, I don't know, because I actually don't have a CD player. What was the problem with those organizations? What kicked their teeth in? A lack of evolution and innovation. I would say that the writing was on the wall. I can say that because I'm not in that business sector, so I can judge them freely, even though I don't know what I'm talking about. But the things that have taken over for them, I actually believe Blockbuster did try to start an online service, but it was too late in the game, and the company has folded. They ignored innovation and evolution. Now, yes, the first part of that sentence is correct. I was a SEAL for a long time, and 20 years ago, I would have to ask the question I'll ask you guys in a different way. And the way I would have asked the question was, who here has ever heard of a SEAL? And a couple hands would go up. If I were to ask that question today, it doesn't get me to the end state that I want, so I have to ask it in reverse. Who in this room has never heard of a Navy SEAL? Precisely. Everybody has. And I know where you heard of it from. You heard of it on a screen of some size that will range, or a screen of a size ranging from an iPhone to an IMAX theater, or you read a book. And the problem with both of those mediums is everything that you encountered, nearly everything that you encountered is absolute crap. All right? I would actually say it's absolute shit. Now, before I go any further, occasionally I will use colorful language. Does anybody have a problem with that? All right. If you do have a problem with foul language, I just recommend for like the next 45 minutes, just try not to be a pussy. All right? And we're going to continue and just drive on here. So, what people don't understand about the SEAL teams, well, there's a lot of things they don't understand. What the problem I have with the movies is they portray an inaccurate perspective and an inaccurate story. One of the best examples I can give you of innovation and evolution is the modern day SEAL teams. Now, if I polled the audience, what one event would most people associate the modern day SEAL teams with? Say it out loud. Bin Laden, right? I shot bin Laden. If you haven't seen that YouTube video, go watch it immediately. It's pretty accurate towards the guy who actually shot him. I digress. The modern day SEAL teams, or the SEAL teams that in 2011 that were selected to go and execute that operation, have almost nothing to do, if not nothing to do, with the organization that became the modern day SEAL teams. So to continue on this journey, I got to tell you guys at least a little bit of a story about what SEALs actually are and where we came from, and it'll highlight the need and the necessity to continue to evolve. So, 1942 was the creation of the unit that became the SEAL teams, and they were called the Underwater Demolition Teams. Does anybody remember what was happening in 1942?
World War II.
Yes. What I like to call it is the deuce, because it sounds better than World War II. World War II was started because of what happened on December 7th, 1941, which was yesterday. It was the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, for those of you who didn't realize that that happened. So in 1942, the Navy commissioned a unit called the Underwater Demolition Teams. Not because they were innovative and not because they were trying to evolve, but because of most thing that happens in the military, because of tragedy. So what kind of operations were we doing in the 40s? What kind of invasions?
Amphibious invasions.
Yes. Rudy, you know the answers, all right? God damn it. But if they're quiet for a few seconds, throw that stuff out there. We're going to work together here, okay? I'm happy you have your shirt on and not wearing a scarf, okay? Yeah. Amphibious invasions. Now let's be very clear. In the 40s, any battle that took place beyond what's called the high water line, so think of any beach, the tide goes up, the tide goes down. If you put a pin in the high water line, which is the point that the tide reaches, anything beyond that was the domain of the Army and the Marine Corps. The Navy personnel were not allowed beyond that point. So our job at that point, the Navy's job, was to get the Army and the Marines to the beachhead. The landing craft ramp comes down, and basically the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan was happening all over Europe. Problem being is that when you're driving a landing craft and you're getting shot at, I have a sneaking suspicion you have a really hard time understanding where exactly the beachhead is. And on more than one occasion, the landing craft doors would drop down, the Army or the Marine Corps soldiers would drive forward, and they would drown. Because it wasn't actually the beachhead, it was a coral reef. So the Navy's solution to that was to create a unit called the Underwater Demolition Teams. And these guys, their job, they would go and they would cover themselves in axle grease and a Jacques Cousteau dive mask, find somewhere to store their massive balls inside of their shorts, and they would swim with a lead line attached to a string, and they would measure the depths from about 1,000 yards from the shore all the way to the beach. They were looking for obstacles, they were marking obstacles, they would blow obstacles, and that was their job. They could not go past the high water line. Of course, born from tragedy. So from 1942 to 1962, that's what the UDT did. In 1962, specifically in January, President Kennedy commissioned SEAL Team 1 and SEAL Team 2. I would say probably based off of guidance from military leaders, forward thinking, trying to figure out the demands of warfare in the future. 70% of the world is covered in water. It makes sense you would want a force that can come from the water, operate on land, and go back into the water. The creation of the SEAL teams, in essence, just basically took that pin out of the sand. We could then operate in the water, and we could go on to land. But it wasn't until probably the late 60s, early 70s, anybody know what was happening in that time period? Vietnam, right? Slightly different than a beachhead invasion. When I joined the military in 1996, and I knew I wanted to be a SEAL since I was 11, so I went and I found as much information as I could possibly find on the SEAL teams. Everything was about Vietnam. The traditional book was Men in Green Faces. And then there was a book called Rogue Warrior. Are you guys familiar with it? Marchenko, yes. I thought that was a nonfiction book because that's the category or the section that I found it in. I didn't realize until much later that it was actually misplaced. It was a fiction book, so I went in with a few skewed misconceptions about what I was getting into. My point is, be careful what you find on the internet. That's a weird way to get to that place. Not everything that you read is going to be true, especially if the book's titled American Sniper, but that's a different story. Vietnam is where the SEAL teams were really, that's where we became the force that most people would recognize. And when I came into the SEAL teams in the late 90s, we trained on tactics from Vietnam. We had gear from Vietnam. We had people who had served in Vietnam, few and far between. And those people, when they spoke, they were the burning bush. Because after Vietnam, There was a little bit of action in Grenada, a little bit of action in Panama, and the last time after Vietnam that any SEALs saw combat action was in Mogadishu. Black Hawk Down. You guys all heard of it? Movie? Okay. Anybody remember what year that was?
93.
Rudy, you're correct again. It's all right. Now I don't even need to look because I can hear the sound of his voice. I know what it's going to be. It's fine. So, 1993. When I say SEALs saw action in Mogadishu, I mean 4 actual people from the SEAL teams saw action in Mogadishu. Panama and Grenada, probably less than 20 in each one of those environments. The point I'm trying to get to is we went from a place where they were very busy to a place where everything became hypothetical. And we spent a lot of time looking in the rearview mirror, focusing on legacy tasks and training for the future based off of things that had only worked in the past. And then, the morning of September 11th, we got kicked right in the teeth. And I watched the second aircraft go in live from my apartment in San Diego. And I thought things were going to change overnight, and they didn't. It wasn't until 2003 that I take it back. 2002, I first deployed over to Afghanistan, and then 2003 when I first rolled over into Iraq. And if I'm being completely honest about how things went for us as a unit, it sucked. It wasn't pretty. We were successful, but it was a pit bull fight the entire way there. We were an organization that didn't talk to each other. The teams are separated on East and West Coast. The even number teams are on the East Coast. The odd number teams are on the West Coast. 1, 3, and 5 at the time were separated by a fence, a chain link fence. I could see all the buildings, but I would not even talk to the people who were at a different team. Because absent an enemy, the SEAL teams will fight themselves. Or other services. We would talk shit about the Marines would talk shit about us, but it didn't really matter because there was no battlefield to figure out what was going on. When I got in, I was at Team 5. We were a cold weather team, focusing on mostly Asia. So we would go to Alaska and do cold weather training. Right down the street, a 9-iron shot away, was SEAL Team 3. They did desert warfare. They got issued desert camouflage. I didn't even get a set of desert camouflage uniform until I went out to the East Coast. They wouldn't tell us how to operate in the desert, and I certainly wasn't going to tell them how to save their life in the cold. Still all SEALs, and then God help you if you were on the East Coast, because I wasn't even going to acknowledge your presence. You were a SEAL, but like you were down here, because the West Coast guys were up here. Because the East Coast guys hated us because they thought we always were walking around in flip-flops and playing volleyball, and they didn't realize we only did that on Fridays, right? So we did the whole time. They just have shitty weather, and they couldn't deal with it. So then 9/11 kicks us squarely in the teeth, and I end up overseas with East Coast guys, and we're wearing different uniforms with different call signs. We have largely the same equipment, but we're using it different ways, and it sucked. We were able to defeat our enemy, but for the first 24 months, we were basically pulling our head out of our ass at the same time that we were operating overseas. Fortunately, that environment doesn't exist anymore. I would say the military is very gray. I've had great relationships with Army, Air Force, Marine, all of it. The rivalries are gone because now it's real. There is no time for hypothetical. This is actually going to happen. We need to work together, and we need to figure out what works as a team. 2011, 10 years later, was Neptune Spear, where they found bin Laden. And the point of telling that whole story is that there's only 69 years between 1942 and 2011. And let's assume you make a 20-year career out of the military. That's 3.5 generations of going from covered in axle grease with a dive mask to landing helicopters in Pakistan and clearing buildings on the #1 target on the U.S. hit list. So why did they call us? Because we evolved and innovated based off of what the battlefield expected of us instead of trying to force the past into the future. We don't try to take our plan and force it onto the world. We take a plan, we throw it into the world, we adapt, we overcome, we make changes as we need to, because I don't care about the plan. I care about success. And that never-ending innovation and evolution, it continues. I got out in 2013. The teams that I came into are not the same teams that I got out of. The teams that I got out of, I guarantee you, are not the teams that are operating right now. Let's just call it 2018 because we're only a few weeks away. And that's going to continue. Not because the SEALs are guys wearing wire-rimmed glasses sitting around in between playing Dungeons and Dragons going, what's the next greatest thing? It's because if we don't do that, people are going to die. In the military, a lot of the time you find yourself in a do-or-die moment. And again, to be honest, in the military, most of the time people have to die before there's a do. Every tactical shift that I saw in my career was based off of a catastrophe. People were running into rooms and then their heads started exploding. So we stopped running into rooms. We were landing helicopters close to targets. The helicopters started burning up in the sky and everybody on board of them was dying. So we started landing them far away. Did we have enough information to foresee those things coming? Probably. We honestly probably did. But you in this room have an advantage over what we had in the military because I was constrained and restrained by bureaucracy. Individuals don't have those restraints, so take advantage of that. If you can embrace innovation and evolution, in my opinion, you're putting yourself in the correct mindset for success. So let's talk about mindset a little bit here on the journey along the way. And by mindset, I mean how I approach combat operations. You can fill that sentence in with how I approach fill in the blank. I would say goals would be a good one for you to approach. So I have planned and executed easily hundreds of combat operations, and I want an estimate from you in this room how many of them went as planned and executed. It's a round number. Zero. A big fat goose egg. So 0 of hundreds of combat operations went as planned. How many of those combat operations do you think were successful? It's another round number. It's on the other end of the spectrum, though. 100%. Rudy's got a lot of answers. Right now, he's kicking your guy's ass. All right? He's kicking your ass. 100% of them were successful. So what does that demonstrate? What does that mean that I actually care about as a SEAL? Plan or success? Success. Okay? We go into the field with the expectation and understanding that our plan is going to change. Because if you give me the choice of an amazingly well thought out plan that I take out and I put it into the real world, but I refuse to deviate from that plan and it terminates in a failure, versus the exact same plan, an amazing plan, well thought out, I go in the field and I need to adapt because I realize the plan's not living up to the reality. And then I need to shift the plan. And then I need to scrap the plan. But it terminates in a success. Which one would you guys take? Success. What ties people to their plans? Ego. 100%. And ego is the antithesis of good leadership. So if you have that mindset where the planning is important, because in the planning process you determine and you spend the requisite amount of time thinking about contingencies and things that can happen, that is the essential portion of the planning process, but then go out knowing that it's going to change, you have the first 2 building blocks. You have that mindset, you know it's going to change, and then you need to add resiliency to that. So now we're getting a little bit more to the meat and potatoes of what I want to talk to you about. So we'll go back to the definition of resiliency, right? Because I think it's easier to start there. But resiliency is half of this equation. Again, it's the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, stronger. And I know people want a complex formula for this, and I don't have one to give you, because in my mind it's very simple. If you want to get comfortable being bent, go out and bend yourself. Avoid doing comfortable things. If you're given a decision, or you have a decision to make, and there will almost always be an easy road to take and a hard road to take, go down the path that is more difficult. Willingly push yourself to that point instead of waiting for somebody to externally push you there. Get comfortable being bent and bouncing back. Avoid comfortable stuff. So the reason I say it's only one part of it is when people look at SEALs, a lot of times they'll throw out the phrase mental toughness. And to me, mental toughness is a combination of two things. It's a combination of that resilience, which you can train and practice by bending yourself. And the other side of that is how you set and then how you approach your goals. That's what mental toughness really is. People will ask me often, are you born with it or can it be trained? And I just say yes, because everybody's born with a certain level of mental toughness, and I think you can build on that, and you can teach goal setting and how you approach the things that you want to achieve. Now, why is mental toughness so important? I'll give you an example from the career field that I came from. The first day of BUDS, the first evolution they do is they sit the entire class down. In my class, it was 180 people, and they sit you down in rows of 10. And an instructor will get up and they'll say, who here wants to be a SEAL? You guys want to guess how many hands go up? I've never seen somebody not raise their hand, because I've never seen somebody lost there. And I think that's the only reason you would not raise your hand. Hopefully they understand it's difficult training. The next question is generally something along the lines of, how many of you are going to be here on graduation day? How many hands do you think go up? Every single one. And then the next question, there's some versions, but how many of you, regardless of what the instructor staff do, are never going to quit? Every hand goes up. All right, so my class had 180. Last day we had 18. If you would have lined us up the first day, there would be height weight differences, plus or minus 10%. But other than that, everybody looked exactly the same. I had world-class runners, swimmers, triathletes, D1 athletes. We didn't have any professional athletes in my class, even though professional or ex-professional athletes will sometimes come through training. And those individuals were almost always the first people to quit. First person to quit in my class was the fastest runner. He quit on his swimming evolution. Fastest swimmer in my class, he quit on the O course, because they had never been challenged with anything outside of the one thing that they were good at. And they were coddled, and they had their education paid for, and they were told that they were special, and that they should eat yogurt and bananas at nighttime. I don't know what else they were told, but whatever they were told, it didn't work for them. And wear a mask with cucumbers, I don't know. Whatever they were told, it only worked for them when they found success. And when they found failure, they failed between their ears. It wasn't a matter of contractile potential of the muscle or how much they could deadlift or pull-ups or fill in the blank. They were, each and every one of those people that I talked about, as far as physical conditioning, was far more physically fit than I was. I'd give myself a C across the board. But it was also my goal to be the gray man. I didn't want to win, and I didn't want to lose. I just wanted to be invisible so people would leave me alone. That's where I wanted to be. It's not about what you look like, and it's not about what you can pick up. It's about what you can tolerate between your ears. That is the difference between people who show up at training and are there at the end of the week, at the end of the day, at the end of the month, at the end of training, versus the ones who have an idea of what it's going to be like, and when the meat grinder starts, they're the first people to go. The most important thing that you can train, if you had one muscle to train, yes, I know biceps look awesome and all those great things, but train the muscle between your ears. Nobody can train that muscle for you. You have to willingly dive into that. All right. So there's mental toughness, right? There's resiliency and goal setting. I think I used this example last year, but I'm going to go back to it again because it's the best way to think about the power of your goals. I would say goals and thoughts are very small things. And I find it easy for people to disregard the power of very small things. And a domino is a perfect example of this. Does anybody know how tall a domino is? Rudy, how tall is a domino? Sure. Yeah. So Rudy thinks a domino is 8 inches, right? Let's play. Dominoes are 2 inches. There you go. Now, a domino, though, is an interesting, small piece of material because it has the contained kinetic energy to knock over an object that is 1.5 times its size. So if you were to line up a string of dominoes, and each domino was 1.5 times the size of the one in front of it, the first few aren't going to look that impressive. But at the 24th domino, you were at the height of the Empire State Building. At the 31st domino, it would be higher than Mount Everest. They have to fall sequentially. That's why I love bringing up dominoes, because the curse of the novice that I constantly see when it comes to setting goals is that they recognize that there's steps that need to be taken along the way, and they see the first domino and they see the last one. But instead of kicking off the first domino, they walk past it and they walk over to Mount Everest and they push against it as hard as they can. And it doesn't go anywhere, so they quit. And they move on to something else. They have to fall sequentially. The advice I give people is to set your goals at a macro level. Aim for Mount Everest, and then focus all of your time on a micro level. The domino that's in front of your face that you need to knock over right now that can get the momentum rolling so you can knock the next domino over. It's a difference in thinking of, can anybody here run a 4-minute mile? Because if you can't, I hate you. Nobody can? So, who said 4 what? 4, yeah, perfect. I'm more in line with that, yes. You know, how long did they say a 4-minute mile was impossible? Long time. How many people broke a 4-minute mile after it was done the first time? Quite a few. It's still an amazing accomplishment. Like I said, I truly do it from the bottom of my heart. Hate people that can do it, but it's still an amazing accomplishment. But if you were to task me or task anybody in this room, like, hey, you need to run a 4-minute mile, think about this just in the power of your thought. Do you think you'll be more or less successful as you think of it as 4 1-minute 400s or that 4-minute clock spooling away? Which one would you rather take? The 4-minute or the 4 1-minute 400s? So BUDS is 180 days long. You think it's easier to look at BUDS as a 180-day program or seeing the sunrise once 180 times? Which one's going to give you more success? A day at a time, right? Hell Week inside of BUDS. It's the 5th week of training, and it is where probably 70% of the attrition is going to occur in the program. It starts on a Sunday night. It ends on a Friday afternoon. If you can see the sunrise on Wednesday, they say you got a good chance of making it. Easier or harder to look at it as 1 week or realize they have to feed you every 6 hours and focus on making it from one meal to the next, which is some of the best advice I ever got in my career, and that is the strategy that I used. But if that doesn't work, how about you just make it through the evolution that you're in? If that doesn't work, how about you just make it through the minute in time that you need to get through until you make it to that meal? When I was a BUDS instructor, my goal was to get people to think big. And I did not want to go back as a BUDS instructor, but I'm very grateful that I did. I actually found it to be one of the most rewarding tours of my career for a couple reasons. One, it was way more fun than being a student, right? There's 2 sides of the coin to being a student. One is where you're laying on your back doing flutter kicks and a dude drinking coffee is pouring water up your nose with a hose. The other side of that coin is being the dude with the hose, with the coffee. I'll take that every day of the week and twice on Sunday. But to be a good instructor, you have to know what the other guy feels like as well. So what I did, because I loved making people quit, because I don't like working with pussies, would I was go and I would try to make people think that their world was as big as humanly possible. So in Hell Week, all instructors have to work through and rotate a Hell Week shift. And I would go, and I would usually go after the officers first. And I would sit there, and all of my job was to try to get in between their ears and be like, hey, how long can you be this cold? Can you be this cold for a week? Because I'm on duty, and it's me and you, buddy, and I'm not leaving you alone. And their goal is to think as small as possible and to think about me talking to them in that moment. They know I have to leave. There's like 120 students in class, and I'm not that original, so I'm going to say the exact same thing to every one of them until I see that it's having an impact and I can get them to doubt how long they can be cold, and then it's game on until they're no longer in training. And then I go to the next person, and the next person, and the next person. And people think that's mean, but the job that I came from, we don't give awards for second place, all right? Second place finisher is usually in a flag draped coffin getting carried by their best friends. And I'm not interested in that, and I'm not interested in anybody having to experience that. So we play to win. A lot of people here in the strength and conditioning world, and probably a lot of you, by show of hands, who here is a trainer? Cool. You're going to have people who come to you, and they're going to want to set their goals, and they're probably going to want to lose some weight. But when I owned a gym, I had people who would come, and they would want to lose 100 pounds or 150 pounds. You want to talk about a monumental task? There's one right there. And if the only thing that person can think about is that huge number, which is what I tried to get them to stop doing, they're probably going to fail. What I would get people to focus on is you need to lose 1 pound at a time. Or you need to lose an ounce at a time until you get to a pound, and then it'll be 2 pounds and 4 and 6, and the dominoes are going to continue to fall, and we're going to celebrate every ounce along the way. One is a goal-setting strategy for success. I'm not saying you won't be successful if you focus only on the big number. I'm saying you're less likely to be successful, and I can't give you any numbers behind that. It's purely anecdotal. A lot of people want to be millionaires, or a lot of people are in debt, and I see people focusing on, I got to make $1 million, or I got to pay off 50 grand in credit card debt. Make it $1 at a time. Stop staring at the difference between what you have and where you need to go, and focus just on putting $1 on top of the dollar until you get where it is you want to be. Don't get overwhelmed. That's what I'm trying to say. Approach your goals from a digestible perspective and understand and accept that micro failures are going to happen. That's okay. Just be resilient, right? What we talked about, you're going to bounce back stronger because you're going to be comfortable being in that position because you're going to seek those uncomfortable things. And you're going to ensure macro success because I don't care about micro failure. I care about macro failure. So macro goal, micro laser-like focus, and keep the dominoes falling. I find out as a man who I am when I'm grinding, when I'm in the valley, in my lowest points, working my way towards a goal. And I also, because I believe in innovation and evolution, if you get yourself to a peak, get a set of binos out and find another peak, and then start working your way towards that. Because if you don't, you're going to get passed by just like Blockbuster Video. You figure out who you are in the space between your goal and the achievement of that goal. And you're going to encounter adversity. And there's really only two ways that you can take it. You can take it as a roadblock, or you can take it as a motivation. And nobody in this room can convince anybody else how to do that. It's a choice that has to be made individually. You can show them the way, but be very cautious wanting more for people than they want for themselves. Only the person can decide. So that's resiliency. And then I'm going to end this with my favorite topic, which is leadership. That's why I asked you guys who in this room considers himself to be a leader. So I'm going to ask a different question. How many of you want to make a difference in the world around you by a show of hands? Okay. Did anybody not raise their hand? I want to know. I just want to highlight you and have you stand and mock and judge you. Anyone? All right. If you want to make a difference in the world around you, the vehicle you need to use is leadership. I'm going to give you another example, and I hate using this example because I find it to be rather cliche and it gets used often, but it goes back to BUD/S. In Hell Week, we have these boats that are called IBS, Inflatable Boat Small. If it's an acronym that's backwards somehow, it probably comes from the military. Nothing makes sense most of the time. And these boats spend almost no time in the water. They spend time on your head because every time that you're going anywhere in BUD/S, you're in a crew of at least 6 people, and sometimes they'll throw an officer in there as well, and you'll rotate around. Everything in BUD/S is a race because competition is important. And it's not okay to be last. And you have to make things a competition and keep score so you know where you actually rack and stack against your peers. So every time that they would go anywhere, whether it was 100 yards or 5 miles to get food, there would be a first place boat crew and a last place boat crew. By about Tuesday afternoon, the same boat crew, it was almost always in first place. And the same boat crew was almost always in last place. So as an instructor staff, what we would do is we would grab the officers, which are usually the boat crew leaders. Unless there's not enough officers, then it would be a senior enlisted personnel. We would grab them, and I would take the boat crew leader from the first place crew, and I'd put him in the last place crew. I would take the boat crew leader from the last place crew, and I'd put him in the first place crew. And we would continue on with our races. And what do you guys think happened? I would like to say that the last place boat crew started winning, but they generally didn't. But what do you think happened to their performance?
Improved.
Absolutely improved, and it improved immediately. Now also think about this. Like I said at the beginning, height, weight differences, a little bit of physical difference. Okay, but we're switching out 1 guy out of 6. So we're not really changing the physical capacity of the boat crew. We're changing out the leadership. Now what do you think happened to that first place boat crew that got the leader from the crew that was traditionally finishing last? What do you think happened to their performance? It slipped. And I'm not going to say that they ended up in last place because they generally didn't, but it decreased drastically. And that is the power of leadership on those around you. I don't know what the difference would be. Sometimes it would be the way that they would communicate. Sometimes it would be the other leader would just carry more of the load and they were inspiring others to work harder. Whatever the difference was, that's the impact that just one person can have on the world around you. That was their micro world, right? But we're getting ready to throw those people out into the macro world. So now that we know it's important, and I can highlight with that example, what is it? What is leadership? Is it being in charge? Is it being the boss? Does anybody in this room know of somebody who would say yes to those questions? Does anybody not know of somebody like that? It's very common, right? I'm the boss because I have the corner office. I'm the boss because I have an acronym on the back of my business card associated with my name. I'm the boss because I drive a Porsche, whatever it may be. It's not about rank. It's not about title. And it's not about position. Leadership is about accountability. It's about accountability to your people. Now, your people might be your family. It might be your team. It might be your business. It doesn't matter. Leadership is about accountability and empowerment, not of yourself, but of the people around you. The job of the leader is to create an environment for the people that work for them can do their jobs, survive, and thrive. Accountability and empowerment. Now, there's two types of leadership, even though I've heard hundreds of different examples of leadership. I work in the auto sector. Teach me how to lead selling cars. I do work for Maytag. Teach me how to lead when it comes to selling washers and dryers in the business world, in the bond market, and fill in the blank. There's two types of leadership. The first type is good and effective. The second type is bad and ineffective. And any other title given to them is an excuse. The leadership qualities and characteristics that we looked for and how we led our small units in the SEAL teams, I guarantee you, is the exact same way that Rudy and his people led his teams in the Marine Corps. And when I've seen behind the curtain of Fortune 500, 150 companies, I'm blown away how often I see the exact same principles. Why? Because they are the same. The military does not have any proprietary software on leadership or teamwork. We just apply it differently and more strenuously than most people do, because the absence of good leadership in the military often terminates in loss of life. The absence of good leadership in the business world often terminates in catastrophic events, but there's a difference in time. That's it. Because they have a longer timetable, people don't take it as seriously. So there's good, effective leadership, and there's bad, ineffective leadership. That's it. Don't try to categorize yourself any other way. It's purely an excuse and a way to avoid that accountability. Now, as far as leadership styles, I'm going to give you two choices to choose from. The first one I would describe as externally imposed motivation, also known as micromanaging, also known as being a drill instructor. Who here has seen the movie, God, why am I blanking on this movie? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rudy. Whew! He's got the answers. All right, Full Metal Jacket, the Marine Corps drill instructor, the most awesome movie character in the history of movie characters. Who knows the story behind that? He was supposed to be the technical advisor, and the actor, he just couldn't get it. And they're like, hey, dude, you're in. You're in, coach. Put me in. And he just went in there, and he was himself. And people think that that's the way that the military is. And that is the way the military is for your first couple months while you're in boot camp, because you're transitioning from a society that I would personally describe as me, to an environment that needs to be predicated on we. And so what you need to do is be broken down a little bit. And they do that via that externally imposed discipline. And another word for that is called micromanagement. Do not be a micromanager. Does anybody here know a good litmus test for whether or not you are a micromanager? Who here manages a team of people right now? Okay. Do you know how to determine whether or not you're a micromanager? It sounds like this. Somebody who works for you comes up to you and says, what do you want me to do? That's all you have to do to figure out whether or not you're a micromanager. You have to listen to your people. If they come to you and they say, hey, boss, what's going on? What do you want me to do? You're a micromanager. Your people are looking to you to tell them what to do. They're not proactively thinking. They're reactively responding to your guidance. And in the SEAL teams, when somebody would come up to me and say, hey, man, what do you want me to do? I'd say, I want you to get out of my face and never ask me that question again. And come to me as solutions, not questions. Because what I want is people coming up to me saying, hey, this is what I see going on. This is what I think we can do to fix it. And I, as a leader, can lift my head up and kind of array all the pieces on the board and look around and say, hey, you know what? That's a good idea. Go execute. Or, you know what? That's a great idea. Make this, this, and this for a change and go execute. They go do their job. I don't do it for them. And I can lead and move pieces around the board. Don't be a micromanager. The biggest reason is if you are a micromanager, you're breeding micromanagers. And micromanagers suck. The problem with micromanaging and why it sucks is that you geographically have to be present. If you leave and you are used to being over your people's shoulder, telling them what to do, telling them how to do it, and how fast that they need to get it done, the second that you leave, I guarantee you they're updating their Facebook status. I know this because in boot camp, when you're getting yelled at, and the drill instructor, the perfect example of a micromanager, is yelling in your face, my only thought is, what is the minimum amount of effort I need to put in to make this person yell at the person next to me. That's it. Micromanagement, you should think in your head, minimum amount of effort required, so that the boss leaves you alone, and then if you show up sick, that's a terrible example. If you don't show up because you're sick, God knows what your people are doing, because they're so used to having you tell them what to do that nothing's going to get accomplished. That's pushing your people, externally imposing discipline. The other side of that coin is pulling your people, and by that I mean inspiring. That's how you need to lead. I equate inspiration with maximum effort. And I do that because I have had the great fortune of being surrounded by some of the best leaders that I think this country has to offer. And I will say this, the best leaders I've ever been around were in the SEAL teams. Where do you think the worst leaders I've ever been around were? In the SEAL teams. It's a swath of society. We have to take the good with the bad, and I think it's important that we're honest. We have some people in the SEAL teams who suck and don't deserve their try. They're still there. Fortunately, they're the minority and they don't define the career field, but they're there. But the amazing people that I was around, can think of one concrete example of a man that I haven't seen in almost 10 years. And I still base the way I act and the way I make decisions to this day in ways that would live up to the example that he set for me. I haven't seen the dude in 10 years, and he's still having impact on my life. There's never anything that he said that inspired me. It was the things that he did and the combination of those two things. Has everybody had that example of a leader around them where you'll put in so much effort, more than you possibly could? Often people will say, I'm going to put in 110%. No, you won't, because that doesn't exist. 100% is maximum. You know what I'm talking about, right? Don't let people use terms over 100%. It's a digression, I know, but it's important, all right? We need to stand for something, people, and that's what you should stand for. Think about how hard you will work to not let down somebody that inspires you. Be that person, not the person that sits over the shoulders and barks orders. Leadership is a skill, guys. It has to be practiced. It has to be practiced. So I'm going to give for you an example. And the example that I like to give, because it highlights it well, is how you get your driver's license in the U.S. So you guys tell me if this is a good idea. You turn 16, but you've never even set foot into a car. But it's your 16th birthday, and it's your right to go get your driver's license. Your parents don't have a car readily available, but your neighbor's got a manual transmission Ford F-150. Awesome. Let's go. Let's go down to the DMV. Having never driven a car, a manual transmission vehicle, you fill out your paperwork, you go up to the window, and you attempt your driver's test. Anybody want to give me the odds on passing? I don't know if there's a number less than 0, but I think it would be somewhere near that. Why does that person fail the driver's test? Perhaps because they don't know how to drive, right? So let's talk about what learning to drive actually is. You find a mentor, and that mentor takes you to a vehicle and it's like, hey, this is how you get in the thing. This is where you sit. This is where the buttons are. These are the pedals. Here's how you turn the windshield wiper on. Where do you start driving a car? Most people. The parking lot, yes. My dad would hit golf balls and I would drive around and hit things in the parking lot. It was a fun game. After the parking lot, where do you go? Rural country roads, right? If you live there, or somewhere that's got slower roads. And what do you have with you, though? You have somebody sitting in the right seat, so if you get to the boundary or the depth of your experience and you're over your head, what do? You draft off of them. And you slowly gain more experience time after time after time until you're on the freeway. Then finally, you're done with the freeway, you go to the DMV, you take the test because you have the requisite knowledge and skill, and what happens? Hopefully you pass the test. At least you're prepared for the test. Does everybody agree that that's a solid strategy for getting your driver's license? Yes. Why don't people apply that lesson to being a leader? It's the same type of test. The consequences are just more dire, in my opinion. The reason I feel that people don't use that analogy is that they confuse position with leadership. A lot of people, if you want to go into the corporate world, they want to rise up and they want to get into the C-suite, CEO, CIO, CMO, fill in the blank. If you do the basic math, there's not enough C-suite positions for everybody to have one. So what I'm telling you is you may never get to the leadership position that you want to have. And then where does that put you? You're completely screwed if you take the approach that I think most people take. They think, I'm not in the leadership position that I want to be in, so I don't need to think like a leader right now. They're going to wait until they have their driver's license test to figure out whether or not they have the requisite knowledge, skill, and ability. And sometimes they are successful, but I would say the vast majority of the time, they fail. You can lead by position. You can be a CMO and a CEO, and that's great if you have that position and you're close to getting that position. I hope that everybody gets that position, and I hope that you conduct yourself in a manner that's befitting that position. But what if you never do? What does that give, or what does that say to everybody else? To me, that's awesome, because everybody else has the opportunity every single day of your life to still lead, not by position, but by example. There is no excuse to not starting to study for your driver's license test right this moment as a leader. If you wait until you get yourself into a position that requires leadership and you've never thought about yourself as a leader until that moment, and you've never practiced how you're going to conduct yourself in emotionally compromising situations or time-compressed environments, you're going to fail. Positional leadership is great. If you don't have that, set the example for every single person around you and take your boat crew from last place as far as you can get to first. Practice now so you're prepared. All right. I'm about to stop running my mouth here. So I got 3 closing points for you. And they are: set the standard every single day, wrapping all of this together. Your standard has nothing to do with what you say. It has to do with how you conduct yourself. It has to do with your example. And caveated with that, and combined with that, is what you allow in your presence is your standard. If you say showing up at work on time is important and you roll in at 8:10, you're done as a leader. If you say physical training is important in this occupational career field, whether that be military, fire, law enforcement, first responder, and you're clocking in with a 42-inch waistline, unless you're 14 feet tall, you're done as a leader, integrity-wise. In addition to that, if you're in a leadership position, and let's say you got to that position with your high school best friend, your lifelong buddy, and you're letting your buddy get in the way with a 42-inch waistline, you're letting your buddy roll in late, and you tolerate that in your presence, I don't care what you say your standard is, that's your standard. What you tolerate in your presence is your standard. Seek adversity. Challenge yourself to do the hard things. Every decision you have in life is going to have an essence of ease to it or an essence of difficulty. Take the more difficult path more often than the easy one. You'll be surprised the impact it'll make on your life. The last point I'll leave you guys with, and then I have a question for you, is you need to think like and act like the leader that you aspire to be. And if you don't aspire to be a leader, then I have no time for you. But you need to start thinking like that right now, in prep for your driver's license test. So I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked you opening up this segment, and then I'll end it there. And by a show of hands, who in this room is a leader? That's the right answer. That's all I got. Thank you.